Om Namo Narayanaaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. I salute Pujya Swami Chinmayananda Ji, Bhagavan Shri Ramana Maharshi, and all the great seers, mystics, spiritual luminaries who inspire you and me, who show to us greater truths and guide us to the ultimate truth of our living. Dear friends, there is immense happiness in me this evening to meet all of you, as I know most of you quite well, so it is a sort of reunion. I salute all of you. These talks are an effort on the part of all of us, the listeners and the speaker, to understand what we call living. We are interested in right living. We are interested in doing things rightly, speaking things rightly, even having right thoughts. Every evening we shall start apparently with different themes or topics. However, all these different questions revolve around the single theme of right living, of goodness, of truth. We have chosen a general title for these 6 talks in this series: Life's Questions and Gita's Answers. Life has a whole lot of questions. From the cradle to the grave, you and I wonder about even fundamental issues like why we are here. Probably some of you are already wondering why you are here in this lecture. If you don't feel alone, there are many, and even the speaker is wondering why he is here. For fundamental questions remain unanswered while we have answers to a whole lot of secondary unimportant questions. And as long as the most basic questions remain unanswered, every one of us remains in square one after earning a lot or moderately, after getting this status or that position, after arriving somewhere apparently, we feel that the journey is a very long one. We feel the destination is far away. Different people feel incomplete in different ways. Someone has a sense of financial inadequacy, someone else feels she is a failure in relationships. A third person might feel lost in terms of the so-called knowledge. I am a very ignorant person, maybe his self-judgment. So we are seeking more wealth, more knowledge, more friends or admirers, or to say the least, more people to approve at least our way of living. We are looking out and hoping that our tomorrow will be a better one than our today. What exactly is the nature of our sense of incompleteness? I'm sure everybody sometimes wonders, are we truly incomplete, or is this sense of incompleteness an illusion? Maybe I am just all right. And it gives a certain amount of peace and relief. Mostly it is short-lived. One says, how can I be all right when everything is going to sixes and sevens? One feels again drawn to yet another pursuit. If one doesn't feel so, there are others who come and say, how can you be so much at peace? Something is wrong with you. From last 3 days, we find you are apparently very content. You feel as though everything is solved. So, one believes one is abnormal. And one doesn't know. Maybe I am abnormal. What a great confusion life is, alas. After a lot of study and thinking, I look at life as, on one hand, a very great mystery, and on the other, I have glimpses of a vision where there is no mystery at all, there is nothing to be solved. So, Here, under these titles, apparently we are going to package some new answers and solutions to age-old problems. Apparently everybody is going to go home with now I learnt a new approach. I got a new answer to these questions. But it would be a very different thing if some of you realize that the speaker apparently did not answer any questions but shook the problems. Do we have to always answer the questions? Perhaps another option could be to shake the very foundations of the question. Sri Ramana Maharshi often said to people, doubt the doubter. You have a doubt, you could say doubt the doubt, but he would go one step further, doubt the doubter. Very smart these spiritual masters are. Putting the ball back in your court was perhaps practiced first by them. Who has the question? Who has the doubt? Find out who you are. But you and I are so used to looking at everything as a method. I too for years looked at the question, who am I, as a very good method, a technique. Ask, who am I? And then ask another question. And then something should happen. Wait with open eyes, alert ears, some sort of, again, trying to grasp something. Friends, I am trying to throw some light on the intricacy of the questions of living. There is an area of these issues which is rarely visited by inquirers. There is a dimension to human suffering which goes utterly unnoticed. In simple terms, and this you have surely heard or read at many places, we take the problems to be real, issues to be real, all the parameters to be real, and we are out to find a real solution. For a change, could we question the very reality, validity of the problems? This little text, Bhagavad Gita, 700 verses, is a very fascinating book indeed. I am amazed over the decades. My grasp of this book has been evolving, and it is quite funny. I think this is a very mischievous work indeed. This Bhagavad Gita, and no wonder Lord Krishna, being a very mischievous Lord, gave this really super mischievous classic to humanity. The verses in the Bhagavad Gita have meanings that are so different to different people. Our attempt in these evenings will be to savor these shlokas on couple of planes. I would perhaps sing a stanza for you and share with you, or why, as a good number of you are students of the Bhagavad Gita, review the verse with you. As I say a few things, I am sure most of you would nod, yes, yes, that is what we too understood from this shloka. Then probably I would say something about the shloka where you would get a jerk. Did the Lord say this? This Swami perhaps is going tangentially now. Then take a second look, you will find, yeah, it could be. Who is to finally settle the dispute, if it is a dispute? You got to go in search of Sri Krishna and find out, Lord, good Lord, what did you actually say in the Bhagavad Gita? For long we thought the Bhagavad Gita had a well-defined structure and shape. Its teachings apparently were very clear. This is it. Now it appears that the Bhagavad Gita can never be known. If you know the Gita truly, the Gita, everything disappears. It is said in the Upanishads, of which the Gita is a very good restatement, that the highest teaching is where the teacher, the taught, and the teaching disappear. न निरोधो न चोत्पत्तिः न बद्धो न च साधकः न मुक्तो न मुमुक्षुः इत्येषा परमार्थता, and all that. Please bear with me if at places I appear to be very abstract, going above the head. Bear with me if it appears that I am causing a great amount of confusion to you. But if you have some patience with me, I shall surely give you a better understanding, and you will have a hearty laugh. Oh, that is what you meant. Oh, fine, no problem. For really, it cannot be abstract, for what we are talking about is life, which is everybody's life. It might look abstract at times because you would have a certain preconceived notion of what the teaching of the Gita might be. So, there are questions and there are answers, different answers that suit different people. But then there is an approach where you take a dispassionate look at the questions themselves and you examine the very ground from which the questions arise, the very bosom, your heart, your mind, your stream of thoughts, where these questions are formulated. Take a look at that very material of which questions are made. You will find there is a very different flavor to spirituality itself. Let's make an entry now to the one theme of right living through the door of this evening's topic. The 6 themes of the 6 evenings are like 6 doors taking us into the same hall. I am letting out the secret first evening itself. There are no 6 topics. You and I are very fond of, structuring everything. If tomorrow Harish Rao comes to the microphone and says that these 6 topics have been subdivided into 12 and Swamiji will cover, it will be difficult to cover all the 12, but about 8 of the subdivisions. A lot of people will feel very good. Is that so? Divide, analyze, and then like climbing the Mount Everest and putting a flag over that peak, tell oneself, I understood this much and that much now remains, and so on. Has been a habit. But great masters talk to us about no partial, fragmentary achievement. When you study someone like Nisargadatta Maharaj, whose conversations have been brought out as that great spiritual classic, I am that. Or you see the beautiful gems of teachings of Sri Ramana Maharshi and the most confusing statements of Krishnamurti. There is a different quality there. In simpler language, and which is delicious, we say, they talk to us about not learning this or mastering that, owning this or gaining that skill. They talk to us about an awakening. When you wake up from a dream, how many miles would you have covered in the dream journey? When you wake up from a dream where, let us say, you were on a long journey and all ideas of how you were progressing, who started together, who was now ahead and who was behind, and how many miles were left, and all those just disappear. You are awake and you blink, close and open the eyes several times and say, hey, what happened to that journey? But then people ask, tell us more about this journey of awakening. That immediately is made into another journey. So let's enter this theme, which is difficult to title, but in a manner of putting it we call right living, through this door of this evening's topic. How does one cope with changes? You and I face changes, and really speaking, changes sometimes cause happiness to us and many other times cause unhappiness or fear in us. There are both these kinds of changes, of course. We are more concerned about coping with changes which are hard on us. And I shall dwell more on these hard to cope with changes. And let me clarify right at the beginning that the light we throw on this issue of coping with changes applies to changes that are pleasant also. What are the unpleasant changes which drives us to the wall, which makes us quite miserable, makes us feel lost and all that? We were wealthy, now we are poor. That could be an example. We were very powerful. Lot of people used to listen to us. Lot of people were at our beck and call. Now hardly anybody cares for us. We were enjoying such wonderful health. Today, getting up is one challenge, sitting down is another challenge. That could be a third kind of change. And then there is the very challenging area and perhaps more vital than what I mentioned before of relationships. In fact, the issues of wealth, health, power, etc. boil down to relationships only. In this world of ours, we find that through wealth, we have a lot of good relationships. Through good health, we have good relationships. And through power, we have good relationships. So when we have no wealth or no power, no health, we find people are leaving us. So the vital issue is change in the quality of relationships. No wonder a lot of thinkers have rightly remarked that the one need that all of us human beings have in the East or in the West or anywhere is to be loved. Swami Chinmayananji often said, to love and to be loved is the greatest privilege of life. And perhaps there is more than a grain of truth if we say, it is love that we seek actually even through power, position, pleasure, wealth, fame, name, health and all that. A sense of being accepted. Then we spice it up. We put a whole lot of other details. If we were to ask ourselves, what does being loved mean to me? We have a whole lot of ideas. We may think in grosser terms, how people treat us, how many people call us if there is any get-together or function, how many people greet us on our birthday, how many people smile at us, how many people praise us, talk well of us in front or behind. In numerous ways, we have a picture of to be loved. But basically, a sense of security, a sense of psychological security, where we feel accepted. We look at someone and we don't believe that he or she hates us. Then there is a sense of feeling loved. We feel free to approach X or Y, and we feel X or Y may jolly well approach us. I would be happy to meet X or Y. She comes to me and I go to her, or she may not, I may not, But the whole thing is not an issue. There is no fear, there is no shaking or trembling within. Oh, does he now also have regard for me as he had before? Oh, does she really think well of me as she used to? It's like that. Suppose there are thoughts, then there is difficulty. So these changes essentially are a certain disturbance in the psychological realm. On the plane of our thoughts, we find a certain lack of well-being. I asked somebody, give an example for a change that is hard to cope with. He said, cultural change. We move from one culture to another, and then in one sense we may be having everything, but the cultural shock is hard to bear. Yes, that is yet another form of change. Take a look at it again. We are habituated to one way of living, one way of celebrating, and a certain way of mourning, a certain way of exchanging pleasantries, and a certain way of keeping distances perhaps. We are at home with certain ways, and then there is a second set of ways, and we find we don't belong there. We find like fish out of water, a cultural shock. So, in all these, do you see that life is a movement in relationship, and it is in the medium of relationships that the so-called finding it hard to cope with change happens. It doesn't spare even spiritual teachers. The so-called religious activity, spiritual sphere, is also a human issue, a human affair. Somebody who might, let us say, taught in Bombay for 2 years and looked upon her as wonderful, and she will make me famous, my student, maybe spiritual. Gita and Upanishads she learnt from me. And over the years she gets smarter, or her beliefs change, and she walks a different path. And I, the teacher, feel quite odd, quite awkward, quite miserable. I might miss her or him or them or whatever. Not just missing on an emotional plane. I think missing is more used on the emotional plane, but I might feel threatened. I might feel insecure. I might feel that I am made a fool of by this and a group of people who, after learning all this, are now with some other belief. So am I a fool? Am I wrong? Or am I judged in some particular way by X or Y? What difference is this? What difference is there in such a situation from family circumstances, company situations? Human life is the same. Other day, a certain author of a wonderful spiritual book, was using an expression. I smiled. He was saying husband mind, wife mind, son mind, businessman mind. And he was throwing light on the various hopes and aspirations, pleasure and gratification, fear and disappointments that occur. And in the list he had included Guru mind also. I jumped out of my chair. Oh, but he was right. Guru mind and Shishya mind. And I could relate to this book by Tony Parsons, an Englishman, who wrote this book, As It Is. And it touches on the same, self-knowledge or whatever you call it, self-realization, enlightenment. And Mr. Parsons talks of the Guru mind. He was confessing about himself, how he going around giving talks, etc., would perceive himself in a certain way. I could relate very well to these thought currents of these teachers, for the Upanishads long back talked about no mind. How about having no mind for a while, if you don't mind? So the no mind is a really fascinating thing. Now, coping with change. Who is coping with change? Who has to cope with change? I have to cope with change. I was studying very well and then met with an accident, had to get out of college and now cannot continue, and meanwhile family's finances also broke, and now an existential problem. I have to cope with it. Numerous. I gave some examples before. One more example I constructed. Excuse me for a little random style of my thought development. Life is very random, and I think talks also, when they are random, can relate better to life. But sometimes this randomness can cause a bit of confusion about the direction. So excuse me if there is some randomness or sometimes there is some repetition. Sympathize with me on that. So I have to cope with change. We have to cope with change. Fine. Now, this I is that area which goes unnoticed. Generally, we do not pay attention to what this I could be. I am I. One may just say, what is there to talk about I? The attention is on the situation. Everybody goes and says, see how much wealth I had up to 2000, even 2002 summer. It is in last 1.5 years, Swamiji, that now see this is what I have. I will show you file photographs, how it was in 98, and now see, you were there yesterday, how people were treating me. So people, all of us, generally give attention to these details of wealth, how it was, how it is. Popularity, how it was, how it is. The way people treated me, treated us, and now how they treat us or treat me. Now this me, is it an absolute reality? Is it an absolute entity? This me, in which there are expectations, in which there are desires, in which there are certain views of how things should be, it is not an absolute entity It is a product of a whole lot of influences. I dare say here, posing a challenge to everyone, that the sense of I that everyone has is nothing but a program. It's like a software program. It is zeros and ones. It is codes, but many layers of coding. By the time you see its very, very external behavior, it doesn't look like, you won't suspect that it is all zeros and ones. We are all coded entities. Behind the codes, there is the reality. In the Gita, Sri Krishna, to give you all a taste of how this old classic touched on these issues, you have wonderful advice given by the Lord to Arjuna. For example, repeatedly he says to the prince of Hastinapura, the great soldier, look, you are in turmoil. He says, Naivam shochitum arhasi. There is the verse, there is the line, for example, Dhiras tatra na muhyati. A wise one, dhira, would not get deluded by such a situation. Another place, he says, Tan stitikshasva bharata, which means, O Arjuna, put up with it. The issues touched upon are literally, specifically, in the Mahabharata. Arjuna found that he had to fight, send arrows at his own teachers, elders, people whom he had always worshipped and adored, and he had touched their feet, and now there is a change. Coping with change in a very unique way. Friends have become enemies. Relatives have become enemies. Teachers are now ones whom I should shoot arrows at. If I don't, they finish me out. What a situation. Arjuna's situation on the battlefield of Kurukshetra is indeed a very dramatic representation of changes that take place in our life. It was a 180-degree change in relationship that he was facing. Coping with change, Drona and Bhishma and number of others changed their position by 180 degrees. They were with him, patting him, blessing him, encouraging him, praising him, hugging him. And now they are his opponents with bow and arrow, with mace and all kinds of weapons. Does it not represent a tremendous change in relationship? Sri Krishna makes these statements as he opens his grand teaching in the song Celestial. Come on, Arjuna. Wise people do not cry over these things. Ashochyananvashochastvam prajnavadanscha bhashase gatasuna nanushochanti panditah natve vaham jatu nasam natvam neme janadhipah nachaiva na bhavishyamah sarve vayamataparam. in the second chapter, 11th verse onwards. Let me translate the next one for you. Dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yauvanam jara tatha dehantara praptihi dhirastatra na muhyati. Just as in the body, youthfulness, middle age and old age are bound to occur. No choice. In the same way, death and the soul moving on to the next life is choiceless for you. Do not grieve. Now, this night our theme is not reincarnation. Don't get sidetracked. The teaching here is changes are inevitable. Don't go and pick on to the specific details of such a classic. In fact, that is an area of philosophical deliberation as far as freedom is concerned, mukti, moksha, for which a simple way of putting is living in cheerfulness, living in peace, living in silence is concerned. As far as that is concerned, reincarnation is a non-issue. Don't waste 1 minute on it. As far as being free from hurt and pride, grief and fear is concerned, what you need to look at is a bit of an inner teaching. Change is inevitable. Varieties of changes take place. Sometimes you are not even conscious of the various phases of those movements. Sometimes you apparently are engineering the whole thing. In a way, you are the one at the wheel. You are steering it, but in another way, the urges in you were so strong that you were helpless. I will not go at this point into another side topic. The changes are predetermined or caused by free will. That's another very big issue, though it is indirectly touched in our treatment of the topic, as you will soon see. Change is unavoidable. And by comparing somebody else with ourselves, in their life it has been very steady and I find it is going up. The graph has been moving up and up and up. Why is my graph suddenly coming down? We are in fact wasting time as well as presuming that the other person's life is most wonderful. I am yet to meet a single person whose life has been most wonderful and mine also has not been. Life is bound to have ups and downs. Swami Chidananda was the last person to leave Chinmaya mission. Nobody thought, and he also did not know some time ago. Then change took place. And he doesn't know what else he will do. If you are afraid of his future moves, he is also afraid. So you have company in that. If you think that he is going, let me not use too many slang words, bit off the point or off the circle, he too wonders sometimes, am I? But probably he is not much afraid, but he is wondering for sure. There is not much reason for fear here, but there is wondering. So, change is unavoidable. In everybody's life, there are lot of unpleasant changes, lot of changing relationships. The zones are being redefined. Outside and inside, Sri Krishna would touch on even matra sparshastu kaunteya शीतोष्ण सुख दुःखदाः आगमा अपायिनो नित्याः. Heat and cold, sorrow and celebration come and go. Agama and apayi. Agama apaya, coming and going. And Arjuna, put up with them, bear with them. One more expression. In the 15th verse, he says, Yam hina vyathayantyete purusham purusharshava samadukka sukham dhiram somritatvaya kalpate. It is these verses where, my God, the way a certain interpretation was in my mind years ago and the way I see now are poles apart. And some of the words today give me shock. And those days the words did not mean much. This verse, which I may translate for you, Samadukka sukham dhiram somritatvaya kalpate. The second half would suffice. One who stays equal, one who remains equal in dukkha and sukha, sorrow and celebration, is fit for amritatva, immortality. So let me take this and show several planes of understanding. The first thing that even a beginner takes up the Gita, reads such a line, is telling oneself, so I should remain equal in joy and sorrow. That's where I am very weak. When something happy takes place, I go to cloud 9. I have always been emotional. And when something goes wrong, I hit the rock bottom. I will try. Tomorrow onwards, at least for my Guru's sake. This judging oneself and then saying, I will try. And slowly, step by step, even Chidananda admitted that he himself has been evolving. So, slow and steady. Everybody has to make a beginning, is it not? Etc. See, I am illustrating a thinking, this is not the teaching now. In fact, there is no teaching. Let me clarify. My attempt in the 6 evenings is not to give any teaching, to cleverly avoid that, escape from that. What I mean is, it is more a matter of throwing light on a situation, on what happens in our mind. And as there is light, necessary changes will take place. If you say, this is the change I will bring about in myself, and you say, I'm going to roll up the sleeves and, okay, towards this change in me, I shall do this and this and this. And by about so much time, the change should take place. I caution you, you are working with thousands of variables and you have your hands on 3 or 4 handles. So, here is the teaching of the Gita. Samadukka sukham dhiram somritatvaya kalpate. I will throw light on 2 parts here. Sama, dukkha, sukha. Dukkha and sukha are the changes, coping with change. Right. Don't say he changed the topic halfway through and went somewhere else. We had to cope with that. Sometimes I become apprehensive whether you judged it or not, and I clarify. So Samadukka Sukham, I hope all will agree with me, is right on the theme that we have taken. Dukkha and Sukha are the changes. And Sama. So one movement of the mind is when we say, I am weak here, I shall get stronger. All right? Very fine. After all, there was another expression, Tan titikshasva. Put up with it, bear with it. Bite your teeth or take a deep breath and, okay, once more, he is going to insult me. I will not say a single word. In graceful dignity, I will bear it. Yes. There is a certain will. Where there is will, there is a way. Interestingly, the statement, where there is will, there is a way, is a very wonderful statement. Ordinarily, it is to motivate people. Come on, don't lose heart. Have the will, and if you will it, if you think you can and you will. Come on, rise, Uttishta Bharata. And you have sayings in the Gita too. Very fine. I am sure all of us willed and decided to get together here, and now we are executing our own decision. We are here. But I would call this, where there is will, there is a way, a very fascinating statement, because where there is no will, there is no way. And if you slightly modify the synonyms, not modify the meaning, Where there is no will, what is will? Will is deciding, rolling up the sleeves, getting down on a course of action. And the new meaning I am sharing with you is, where there is no will doesn't mean you are lacking in motivation and you are low in spirits or negative. No, not that. Don't go to the opposite. Other than the will, there is what is called intelligence. Roll up your sleeves and decide. Good, hats off to that. And be afraid and sink, collapse. Oh, we pity that, we sympathize with that. But there could be someone who says, hey, I don't want to come under any pressure, outer or inner, and at least in this situation, there is no such urgency that I have to rush to the garage and take the car out and act. Wait a minute. Let me see this dukkha, this sorrow, this agitation. I would like to see what this is. Seeing is decisively different from willing. And the ultimate potential of spirituality is in seeing, not in willing. There is acting, karma bhumi, the plane of action. There is. All of us do karma. Karmanyevadhikaraste. Your duty, or your right is to action. Well said. But what is behind karma? Thoughts. And there are all those sayings. Sow a thought, reap an action. You sow a thought, and it is thoughts coming one after another which shape into action. Sow a thought, reap an action, sow an action, reap a habit, sow a habit and reap a character, sow a character and reap a destiny. Wonderful. This has guided, shaped, inspired, and motivated people, brought millions on the so-called right track. We bow down before these teachings. But are they the ultimate teachings? Can we see a little beyond word, deed, thought, motives of thoughts, or motives of thoughts? What is there in you deeper, further beyond? That is the faculty of seeing. You can see your motives, you can see your fear, you can see your punctured self-esteem, or you can see your bloated notion of who you are. So you can see. When you are fooling somebody, you can see, and you may not see also sometimes. You can see, or perhaps you don't, and that makes a big difference. You can see that, hey, I am fooling this fellow and I think I should stop. Seeing. And that seeing can have tremendous scope. I can see that I am fooling somebody in a very superficial way. I can see that I am fooling someone for there is pleasure in it, or there is a material gain in it. My security is in my being able to fool all these people. I can see so much more. I can see the me, M-E, the me in operation. I can see the me that tremendously contributes to dukkha and sukha. Dukkha, sorrow, sukha, celebration. Sorrow and celebration, I believed, were caused by all these external factors, this cruel society and this, wicked relative of mine, or that unkind boss or colleague or whatever, right? Now I see that the me which is full of certain desires, certain ambitions, certain judgments, certain prejudice, certain presumptions, these make the me. And if these were not to be, there is no me. You and I believe that there is a certain identity of ours, free from our beliefs. I would question it. If you were to be free from beliefs, will there remain a me? If I give you a mathematical equation, you equals your beliefs. Beliefs of all kinds, relating to religion and morality and business practices and in the institution of family and marriage and parenting and guruship and shishyaship and all these beliefs. You equal beliefs. Think, that's for you to work on. Inquire, could that equation be right 100% or to only an extent? Two hands are required for a clap. There is the me, and then there is the coping with change. There is the me, then that me celebrates or suffers. That me feels hurt, the me shrinks, or the me feels elated, there is this me, and as long as there is this me, sama dukkha sukha, equanimity in joy and sorrow, is a matter of will. Where there is will, there are many ways. Where there is no will, there is only the landing ground. There is only a pathless land. Where there is will, there are ways. Where there is no will, there is only land. And Vedanta would say you are that land. And you and I thoroughly relish it without seeing its full significance. We thoroughly enjoy, and most of us tracing our descent to the land where the Upanishads were recited, feel so happy. Vedanta said it right. Hamara Vedanta said it right. Thank you, Swamiji, I got it. And if the speaker makes a statement, Vedanta missed it, then you have dukkha. Vedanta said it, you have sukha. And sukha dukkha come about. Now you may be curious, but Swamiji, did Vedanta say it or not? Vedanta did say. It said. Many seers, many mystics, many Mahatmas and many non-entities also said it. Round the world, by God's grace, whatever that may mean to you, this truth was seen, and Samadukka Sukham Dhiram Saha, that person, she or he, Amritatvaya Kalpate, becomes fit for immortality, and that immortality is the absence of me. The absence of me does not lead to immortality. The absence of ego is immortality. When there is no ahankara, one lives in deathlessness.